Welcome to Funnel This, the podcast where fintech marketers and founders learn what really works when it comes to brand building and driving demand.
It's hosted by me, Sally Baker. I'm the founder of fintech marketing agency Wondrous.
Follow the podcast on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Just search Funnel This.
Today I am absolutely thrilled to be joined by Shameer Sachdev, who is the founder and managing director of growth marketing agency Growth Gorilla. And I'm really excited to have this conversation. I think I'm going to learn a lot about growth marketing because hopefully you're going to share some fabulous insights with us.
Hopefully, yes. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Tell me, first of all, a bit about Growth Gorilla and what made you start the agency.
I mean, Growth Gorilla, as you said, it's a growth marketing agency. Been around for 7 years or so. We focus on predominantly customer acquisition through pay media, influencer marketing, and more so creative production now. So think, UGC ads, static ads, and maybe even some landing pages from time to time. Main reason I started the agency, I was marketing director for a financial trading company for around 5 years. Decided that I was tired and fed up of promoting financial products. Decided to set up an agency to do anything but financial services, and didn't make any money at all for about a year, and then very reluctantly started doing some consulting bits of work, and before I knew it I was running an agency, and here we are 50 clients later.
Well, that was one of the things I was going to bring up actually, because I noticed on the website it said 40 plus fintechs, and I thought, I wonder when the last time that was updated, because I bet it's more than that now.
Yeah, well, that was updated, I don't know, a year and a bit ago, so yeah, it's been 50 since, so yeah, 50 total, yeah. And
what sort of fintechs are you working with?
I mean, it's a real mixed bag. So everything from investment platforms, payments, insurance, lending, and then also, from a global perspective, and crypto as well. Done a lot of that. And then location-wise, everything from UK-based to North America, Middle East, Southeast Asia, LATAM. I think we've done run campaigns now in, I think it's over 38 countries as well.
Wow.
So yeah, it's
that's
pretty cool.
Amazing. So in terms of business stage, what sort of size of business do you take? Is it like enterprise, or what sort of businesses are you working with? Yeah,
so I think in the early days we were doing a lot of startup stuff, but we've kind of moved away from that a little bit. We do have a few clients that are in the startup phase, but we generally say a big Series A onwards is kind of where we're at. So we've kind of got clients who've kind of landed their sort of first 10 million and they want to start to branch out, all the way to very established organisations. So to give you an idea, one of our clients is the 6th largest fintech in the world. So they're well into the billions in terms of valuation. So yeah, very, very sort of broad remit. Cool.
So before we go too far, we should cover what is growth marketing.
Yeah, I suppose growth marketing kind of versus I suppose traditional marketing for me is more about experimentation and testing and validating or disproving hypotheses versus I suppose thinking of or ideating an idea, putting it out there, and then hoping kind of customers come in off the back of it. So it's a lot more iterative, a lot more fast moving, and definitely a lot more data backed.
So you're obviously working with, as you said, maybe a big Series A onwards. Yeah. Is there a particular stage that you think fintechs should start to use growth marketing?
As a bare minimum, they've got to have product market fit. And then as a bare minimum, in my opinion, some people disagree, I think you've got to have the budget to go with it as well. It's very, very difficult to start trying to scale an organisation when you're on a very, very sort of tight shoestring budget.
Yeah.
There's better marketing that can be done, in that sort of situation. And then I think to a certain degree as well, you want to make sure that you've got the right tech set up and that you've got, adequate internal resources to manage that process as well. So sort of breaking those sort of things down a little bit, budget-wise, we want to be testing, various platforms. That requires a minimum budget per channel. You can have the right assets, the right creative. Production of creative nowadays is arguably more expensive than it was a few years ago, because now you've got TikTok, and so you've got UGC videos and all of that sort of stuff. Resources. When you work with an agency, we don't create less work for you. We actually arguably create more work, and so you need someone on the receiving end there to be able to work with the agency. And then product market fit. If you're still finding your feet with your product, you shouldn't be thinking about scaling at all whatsoever. You should be thinking about test and iterate. So I think you've kind of got those sort of things in place. You can start looking at really sort of scaling up the activity that you're doing.
So I guess it sounds like, and again, the type of businesses that you're working with, there's probably a minimum of 1 to 2 people at least in the marketing department. Yeah,
absolutely, yeah.
So what can you expect from search compared to social in terms of acquisition?
Yeah, so in a nutshell, you can expect that search is going to be a lot more of a cheaper acquisition channel versus social, but it's kind of important to look at why that is. So search is completely intent based. So if you're looking at something in a time of need, you put it into you put it into Google. Occasionally you might put it in Bing, and then you're served an ad that's relevant to your question or your request, and then you get taken to a product page, whatever it may be. So that's going to be really high intent, really straightforward in terms of from a funnel perspective, and so therefore it's going to be very, very cost efficient, because you're serving people what they need when they need it at that moment. Versus social, which is you are effectively interrupting someone's day to then say, hey, look at this. But both have their place, in marketing. If we only do search, then you're only going to be feeding the immediate demand and the intent for the problem that is out there. And in some instances, your product may not be in demand because there is no intent, because it doesn't exist yet. And so therefore you can't rely on Google as a channel, or it may be that there's only a certain amount of traffic available. So where social steps in is expanding that audience and expanding the knowledge of your product to that audience, and then creating demand for the product as well. Now, because we're interrupting people and we're creating that demand, the cost of acquisition on social is going to be higher. Not in all cases, but predominantly, or likely to be more expensive. But it's such an important part, because without having that awareness and without using the social channels, what you're losing is brand awareness, trust, and then demand as well. And it's really important to look at your blended acquisition cost as much as you're looking at your individual channel acquisition cost. Because if you're not doing that, I can guarantee you there's kind of only one place you end up, and that's back on Google and only running brand campaigns.
Yeah, and I think everybody will be, if they think about how they use search and social in their own lives, they'll be able to understand and see that. I definitely can, because most of my purchases probably come from social, but not first time.
Yeah.
After I've seen it a number of times is when I'll make the purchase, but I very rarely go into Google to search for something and buy it.
Yeah, I tend to see, when I am on socials, if I see something, I've got this thing about not clicking ads. I don't know why, but I'll then go to Google and I'll search it, and I'll go onto their, because I want to go onto their website organically. I don't like being taken down the landing page. I want to be in charge.
See, I want to go straight to where I want to get to.
Yeah, I just like the customer journey, probably. I don't know.
But obviously you are unusual in that, this is the industry you work in, isn't it? So you're likely to behave slightly differently, I guess.
Yeah, never. Yeah, marketers should be the last.
Yeah.
The last people that marketers should never use themselves as a barometer.
Yeah.
Because you never consume media in the same way that your target customer will.
What makes a fintech exciting to work with?
That's a really good question. It's probably is one of many things, right? It can be a very boring product, but a really interesting team that wants to try and make that boring product interesting and do exciting creative things, that can be great. Or it can be a really, really interesting, disruptive product that you can then get really, really creative with. I think the other thing as well is if you've got something that's almost arguably difficult to market and not that easy, that makes it really exciting as well, because it's like, how do we go away and solve this problem and create an actual marketing channel and cut through to then make it successful.
And do you find that the fintechs you're working with, predominantly are they looking to you for those creative ideas, or do they bring their own creative ideas to the table? And I guess there's a difference in how easy you find those to work with then.
Yeah, I think it's always a mix of the two. We've got some clients that lean on us more, we've got some clients that contribute a lot more. I think, it's about having a collaborative process between us and, or not just us, or any agency and client. It shouldn't be an us and them situation, it should be a partnership.
Yeah, there's got to be some trust involved, hasn't there? And you're the expert. Yeah,
exactly that. If you're using your agency as a, they're an order taking system, then, they're not really, what value are they adding? In that point, really, it's about who's going to do what you're asking them to do for the cheapest possible cost. Whereas we kind of like to position ourselves that we're a partner with our clients, so we're there to work with them to solve these problems. So in an ideal world, we actually, we want to contribute creative ideas, but we equally want the client to weigh in as well. What we don't really want is to be told, like, go away and do this without any input, and then expect us to kind of fix their problems with marketing.
Yes.
That's not what we want to do. And I find that the clients that we have the best lines of communication with, that are open with, and are actually almost like positive about failure as well. They're the ones that, in my view, we get the best results from, have the best relationships with. And then you solve these problems and you do great things together.
Yeah, and you've got to try things, haven't you? You've got to be experimenting, and not everything will work, but you've got to follow what you think is worth trying, and give it time to succeed, I suppose, as well. Yeah,
exactly that. It's should never be you should never be scared of failure, or an experiment not working, whatever. I mean, we've done a proposal recently, and there's a whole question around geography. And in our view, breaking down the campaigns, geographically made sense. And they said, well, they actually had some data on their side that showed that actually geography wasn't going to make a difference. And our view to that is, well, that's actually going to be almost like the number one thing we've got to test, right? So, and it doesn't really matter who's right or wrong at that point, because if we're right, fantastic, we're proving their data wrong, but the client's better off. And if we're wrong, great, that's fine, we can crack on and move forward then. The last thing you want to do is get entrenched in an idea, not test it, and then someone comes in 6-9 months later down the line, then tests it, and it turns out actually you wasted 9 months when you could have perhaps solved this issue at a much earlier stage.
What signals let you know that a fintech is serious about scaling?
Actually, probably a couple of things. Sounds, we don't like to talk about it, especially in the UK, but budget.
Yeah.
Do we have a defined budget for this initiative? I'll be really clear around that. I mean, we can probably expand it, not just say budget, but say financials. So we're clear on the budget. Are we clear on the metrics that we're trying to achieve? Have we got realistic numbers? Are our forecasts, founded and grounded in data? That's definitely one area. I think the second thing is, as I said, you nail product market fit, really clear on the value proposition. And I suppose, for us as an agency, we know a client is serious when they've reached out to us and they obviously know what channels that we work in. They are kind of clear as to what role that channel is going to play in their overall marketing mix. Versus kind of shopping around for an answer or a solution. So I think if they've kind of done those bits, then we know that they're pretty serious.
It's like your qualifying criteria.
Yeah, it is.
Moving on, we're going to get a bit more detailed now. Influencer marketing.
Okay.
Really excited to hear more on this. How are top performing B2C fintechs using influencer marketing to build trust and engagement?
How? I think there's a few ways that you can use influencers, but in my view, the companies that are using influencer in the right way are, especially fintechs, are looking beyond just working with what we kind of call finfluencers. And I think, finfluencers are a great first stop and an obvious stop.
Let's just go back a step. What is a finfluencer?
Okay, so a finfluencer is an influencer or creator that talks specifically about financial products or services.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, they'll talk about mostly sort of investment-based stuff, and then also some macroeconomic-based stuff, and then probably some budgeting bits and pieces as well. So they're really, really good for investment platforms. They're okay and not too bad for challenger banks, but if you're a payment solution, it's not really a viable option for you to work with with an influencer, because it's not your target audience. So I think it's about finding the creators and influencers in the marketplace that are really talking to your target audience, and this is kind of my view on the ones that are doing it best, I suppose, and the best way to build trust is that they're taking or better still, they are allowing the influencer to produce content that's endemic with their audience, versus being really prescriptive about how the influencer should communicate their product, because at the end of the day, the influencer knows their audience better than you do. And so I think that the brands that are doing that and really leaning into that and then getting creative with it are doing a great job.
It's got to be authentic, hasn't it? I mean, influencers are everywhere, aren't they? And I think it's very obvious when they're doing something that's outside of their usual style. So, yeah, you're right, they'll know their audience best. Do you think it's a nice to have, or how important do you think influencer marketing is?
That's a really good question. I think that boils down to kind of where what stage your organisation is at. I think it's a nice to have if you're super early stage and you're still trying to work out your messaging, and it's a nice to have then, and arguably probably not the first channel you should be going towards. But I think if you've nailed down your product market fit, you've got your distribution channels like your pay media set up, your out of home and whatnot, and you're really clear on kind of what your value prop is and what your message is. At that point, I think it then goes from being a nice to have to being a must have. And to kind of qualify that, we see this a lot with the larger organisations and more established firms. Their channel mix will be something along the lines of Google search, TV, and some out-of-home activity, and then a sprinkling of social media activity, organic and whatnot. And some of them will even have some brand ambassadors and whatnot. But there's that vacuum that they're not occupying, which is that influencer / paid social arena, and they're not really connecting the two. And then on top of that, they're not connecting their offline activity with their online activity. And then usually their organic channels are pretty dry. And that's like a whole space where you can, I suppose, you can have significant impact and influence your acquisition cost in a positive way by starting to look at these channels more seriously. And you can kind of see evidence of that because the challenger fintechs have come into the space. They've gone, look, we can't afford to do TV. Out of home's kind of out of the question. Google search is hyper competitive. What are we going to do? And they've gone, well, we see the space on Instagram, on YouTube, on TikTok. Right, okay, let's go work with some creators and produce some really cool content, create cut through, and then get eyeballs onto the brand. And they're kind of, some of them are kind of sitting on these larger brands' doorsteps eating their breakfast. So I think if they don't start doing it, then it's a huge missed opportunity.
I think we've probably covered a little bit of this already, but common pitfalls of using influencers. What are the common not pitfalls, sorry, mistakes? What sort of mistakes do you see when fintechs start to use influencers?
Yeah, so I think the first mistake I see a lot is conflating influencer marketing with affiliate marketing. So, for terminology purposes, an affiliate is someone who works for, introduces a client and works on a bounty basis, so they get paid on the CPA. And we'll see, some brands come and go, oh, well, we're doing influencer activity, we've got some creators working on the CPA. That's great, but that's not influencer marketing. That's very, very direct response marketing. And it's pay to play effectively. So they kind of make that mistake and they conflate it and they think, well, why would I pay an influencer a sum of money for no guaranteed outcome? And then if they do manage to get talked into it by someone in the marketing team or an agency or whatever, they'll go and do that. And then they'll turn around and go, well, we didn't see as many sign-ups from that and we paid X amount of money. And the mistake there is that you've got the wrong KPIs for the channel at that point. So making sure that you're aligning the right KPIs with the right channel, being clear on the outcomes prior to putting the activity live. And then other mistakes, I think one of the biggest mistakes is not having some sort of benchmark, pricing model. It's the influencer marketing's the Wild West. Influencers will charge what they can get away with to a degree, right? But it works both ways. Sometimes you'll do a great deal because the influencer doesn't know their value, fantastic. And in other occasions, they know that they are one of maybe 2 or 3 people in that particular space, and so they can get away with charging it. So you need to have some sort of benchmark. And then I think there's a lot around contracting, so being really clear on talent image rights, licensing costs, and kind of all of the the delivery times and the expectations, and having all of the legal infrastructure in place, and then that kind of leads on to like vetting the influencer, and then also kind of having a backstop if suddenly your creator ends up in hot water because they made a distasteful like joke or something.
I just wanted to come back to what you were saying about metrics and the difference between where an influencer is actually just doing some affiliate marketing for you, or are they actually being an influencer? Does that come down to, I guess, the fintech having a clear understanding of what their objective is for using that influencer? Like, what stage of the funnel is using an influencer trying to drive?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you're doing influencer marketing, in reality, it's top of the funnel, middle of the funnel. It's an awareness piece. Yes, you are going to get direct acquisition from that activity, and we can track that through UTM parameters and links and all the rest of it. But what I want to see when we're doing good influencer activity is, I want to see organic traffic increase, I want to see brand search volumes increase, I want to see click-through rates on related keywords, I suppose both organic and paid, improve. I want to see acquisition costs across the funnel go down, and that should be the impact. The way I've been sort of communicating influencer marketing recently is by comparing influencer activity to TV activity. And we went through this exercise of almost like reimagining how we communicate and talk about influencer marketing. And we were like, well, how did the first people who were selling TV advertising sell it? And so we kind of took a step back, and the way we've been framing it is, think of your influencers as mini TV channels with their own audiences. Why are we doing TV? We're doing TV to drive awareness, create trust, drive traffic to the site. What we're not doing, what we're not expecting TV to do, is get people to sign up almost immediately. That should be left down to your your other channels, your remarketing activity, your email activity, your paid social activity, etc. That should be filling up that space. And really what the influencer piece is doing, much like the TV, is just driving that traffic into your site, putting the eyeballs onto your brand, and then making your audience feel like that they know you.
I think that's an absolutely brilliant analogy to help bring that to life. How can brands ensure their influencer campaigns are authentic?
Yeah, let the influencers pitch concepts to you. Again, very much talking about not being overly prescriptive. Typically what we'll do is we'll put a brand pack together for an influencer, which will have details about the brand, the challenge we're trying to solve, the brief itself, and make sure that and also like do's and don'ts and stuff from a compliance perspective. And then we'll kind of leave it to the influencer to come up with ideas. Once they've done that, really what you should be doing is, as a brand, is only sticking your oar in on, product related, feedback and compliance feedback. Everything else, frankly, it's none of your business, because the creator knows their audience better than you do. And I think the other thing as well is, and I'm yet to find a fintech financial services client that's willing to do this, which is actually be adventurous with the types of influencers that they're choosing. As I said, most of them start with this influencer stuff. The next batch that we're willing to sort of broaden out a little bit tend to sort of go with lifestyle influencers who talk about financial stuff, and then that's kind of where they end up. There's a few that, bigger campaigns that have happened and you can kind of spot around, but usually they're part of a wider creative concept. I'd really, really like to see a trading brand, for example, go do a campaign with a bunch of skateboarders or snowboarders. Let's do something interesting and fun like that. That's going to get eyeballs onto your brand. And then before you talk about target audience, then you pair that up with other traders, for example, and fill the gap that way. But that's how you make it interesting. Yeah.
So where do you start if you're thinking about looking for an influencer? Like, what's the starting point then?
So look, I think to kind of select your influencers, it's probably starts at probably two ends really, and then kind of finding the center point. So one is target audience, and then what we want them to do, and then kind of at the other end is, I suppose, the degree of creativity. Some brands are very, very risk averse, and they want to stay in that space of influencers and lifestyle / financial focused creators. And then on the other end, you've kind of got brands who are kind of willing to pretty much see any and every idea. The key thing that they kind of all want to see is, how does it then relate back to their product? In my view, doesn't always have to, but we'll come to that afterwards. Kind of in between that, kind of once we kind of find the line, it's about going, I suppose, almost out to market, and then looking for the right type of influencers that kind of fit that mold in terms of both target audience, but also the campaign idea. Unlike buying, traditional media though, where you've got, specific billboard space in one place, or a TV channel that's got a very specific audience. Once you kind of get out in market and start looking at influencers, then the perfect influencer for your kind of creative idea and solution may not be there. They just may not exist, So what you kind of have to do is find the ones that fit closest in terms of the campaign, and the ones that also then fit closest in terms from a brand perspective. And then you then kind of need to kind of bring all of those creators together, and then almost do almost like recalibrate a little bit. Hey, look, we couldn't find this influencer who does X, Y, and Z and talks about this, that, or the other, but we found someone who's really similar that does this instead. So we can tweak the idea and do this with them. And then the other aspect as well, what you've got to think about is that, and brands don't realise this, which is just because you like an influencer, it doesn't mean that they like you. And it doesn't mean they have availability for you, and they're not kind of sitting around waiting for you to do a piece of content with them. So you've got to kind of look at availability, schedules, and if they do want to work with you as well. So kind of once you kind of got all of those pieces, you can then start to put together a campaign. Yeah, you might have to re-augment it, you may have to pivot, but you kind of reach that end point.
Really reminds me of having a birth plan.
Yes, it's exactly like that.
doesn't necessarily.
Don't laminate
you've
it.
got to know that it's probably not going to work out the way
yeah.
you intend. But you can still get a great outcome even though you've pivoted.
Well, first one, yes. Second one, not so much. But yeah.
I guess there's got to be so many trends happening all the time in the influencer world. Are there any that you think fintechs need to start paying closer attention to?
Trends. I mean, that's really, really difficult because it's like you said, there are trends. Yeah, there are trends always happening. I've got to be honest. I don't think there's anything, for a brand to be successful on social media, and I'm not an organic social media expert here. There's people who, in my view, who are a better place to talk about this. But in my view, I think the quickest way to make your brand look really dorky and uncool is to jump onto a trend for no apparent reason that kind of doesn't align with your brand, and then doing it like 3 weeks later because it's taken you 2.5 weeks to get the idea through compliance. If you can't move quickly on it and it kind of doesn't fit into what you do, then just leave it. It's not
So
cool.
keep an eye on what's happening, but select what's right for you.
Exactly that. If you can kind of find something that fits you, well, and it's something that you do talk about, by all means go ahead and do it. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a risk, really, to be honest.
I'm going off piste here, but like personally, how much time do you sort of spend on social media looking at stuff, and it feels like that's got to take up a lot of your time.
So me personally, this is a dangerous question. Me personally, look,
you've got to have massive screen time, right?
Yes and no. So I'm actually not personally on Instagram or Facebook or TikTok.
Right, okay, I find that very surprising.
Yeah, it's more down to. So I'm a Twitter/X type of person because I like news and trends and whatnot, and then mostly YouTube and podcasts. I mean, I did have TikTok, I did have Instagram, but it was a huge time suck, and I try and optimize. I'm just really dorky, right? Yeah, I just try to optimize my time as much as possible.
Yeah.
For work.
Yeah.
Because I'm looking after my clients for you. That's why.
I mean, because I'm not on TikTok, and I just find it overwhelming. I think I don't even know where I can't add anything else into my day. So interesting.
But equally, it's probably just on balance to say like that's my influencer marketing manager, my account director, my team. They're
all over it.
They're all over it, yeah, and they're like uber cool, aren't they? Because they're young and fresh with ideas. So.
Yeah. When it comes to paid media, is there something that you see fintechs getting wrong often?
I think not necessarily getting wrong, but I think if you kind of break it up into sort of two parts, where you kind of got sort of one side of the fence, just kind of like challenge brands, and then the other side of the fence, you've got quite established brands. I think on the established side, they're kind of doing two things really that I think are big opportunities. One, as I kind of mentioned before, is they're probably not leaning into paid social enough, and the reason they do that is because they've kind of got entrenched in this marketing channel mix that's kind of been working forever for them. And then as soon as they turn on a meta ad, they kind of freak out and go, oh, the acquisition cost is nowhere near search. And then they turn it back off again. And then also kind of they have an issue around sort of producing creative at the sort of volume and scale that they need. So that's a big opportunity. And I think the other thing as well is they're probably not doing enough with the data, and what we tend to see is that they think they're doing a lot with the data, but they're leaving so much money on the table because they're kind of again entrenched in their own in their kind of older systems and setup. And then kind of on the other side of the fence, you've got kind of the let's call it post Series A type of brands where they're running activity, and then again their opportunities usually what they tend to do is really fixate on acquisition cost, and so what they're doing is that they can't break out. They don't really have a breakout channel or break out of the channels that they're using because they're not allowed to go beyond £52.27 CPA, and then you kind of get stuck in that position. And sometimes kind of what you need to do is go out a bit bigger and a bit broader and then cut back. Whereas I think if you try and sort of start at the opposite end, which is start a lot smaller and smaller, and then add to it, that actually is a little bit more difficult. So kind of like, again, the analogy that I use, it's like, if we're sculpting a masterpiece here, we cut away from the clay, not add to it. So you've got to allow a bit of flex and room for manoeuvre for testing, experimentation and failure. So that's kind of like the two issues that I kind of see on either end.
So it sounds like you wouldn't advocate somebody starting with only one channel. Then you'd advise, if you're starting out, that you'd select a few and then see what works.
Yeah, again, that depends on budget, right? So I think you've got the budget to start activity across a few channels, then you absolutely should. And then what you should be doing is testing creative and messages, etc., and then kind of working out what messages work best on what channel, what journeys, what type of customer and whatnot. If, however, you're in a position where you can only do one channel,
what should it be?
Yeah, I get.
Silver bullet, come on.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Does it exist?
No, there's no such thing as a silver bullet. It's just if you've got one channel, you're going to lean towards Google Search and Meta. That's kind of going to be your starting stack. And that's just because Google Search gives you the high intent, so that's going to give you the lowest acquisition cost. And Meta is, because it's most number of users, and it's got a really, really solid algorithm. And also you can run static ads on it versus TikTok, which you're going to get all the UGC ads, and the algo's not so developed. And there's a smaller number of users on there as well. But we can actually talk about that for financial services companies, because TikTok does have an advantage over Meta now. So Meta has special ad categories at the moment, which is only applicable to financial services companies. So that's stripped away a lot of the targeting parameters like age, gender, and kind of all of that sort of stuff. But you gain that back in TikTok. So again, I suppose if you ask my question now, yeah, I like to be spread across 2 or 3 channels, and then kind of see what works. If you can genuinely only have one channel, then I think you're going to just make some really educated guesses as to kind of which channel is going to be best for you in a starting place. But don't be scared to kind of like test Meta for a month or 2, test TikTok for a month or 2, and kind of find your groove. But I think if you're doing that, you're not ready for kind of growth marketing at that point. Really, for growth and scale, you should have, as I said, as much with product market fit, you should have a good idea of what channels are working for you as well.
Thinking about metrics, what would you say are the important ones that you should be tracking?
From a pay point of view, for me, so my head of performance is going to, he'll not be happy with this response.
He won't know.
Yeah. I can just picture him just his head exploding. Personally speaking, all I really care about is money going in and the acquisition cost at the end of it. But I think, and if I'm honest, I think that's what CMOs should be focusing on. However, if you're if you're in-house and you're focused on a particular channel, obviously, or if you're an agency or you're running paid media activity yourself, then it should be cost per sign up, cost per KYC, cost per deposit, and then cost per first action, and then follow-up actions. They're kind of the milestones that we're looking at. That's the sort of metrics I want to look at. But it's a really, really broad, broad question.
Any metrics that you wouldn't spend too much time looking at? Any more vanity ones?
I mean, if I'm going for sort of just direct acquisition, I'm not too worried about impressions. If, however, I am doing an awareness campaign, then it's kind of the opposite is true. I care about impressions, I care about engagement. I'm not so worried about the number of sign-ups.
When would you sort of recommend an awareness campaign to perhaps precede another campaign?
I think if you're at the point where you're funneling money into an array of channels, and you've got predictability as to you put X in, you're going to get Y out, and you're now reaching the point where you are your CPA stagnating, not necessarily increasing, but stagnating, that's probably the time you're going to start thinking about running some awareness activity. Because what that tells me is that you've kind of picked up all of the apples off the floor. And really now, if you try and sort of grow the market, through direct acquisition and just, try and pick up more apples off the floor or go broader, it's just going to cost you more money to do that. Also, if you're finding as well that your quality of user isn't perhaps where it needs to be or isn't improving, that for me is kind of where you're going to start looking at awareness. That's particularly of interest for fintechs, because where your revenue is tied to, say, assets under management or payment volume, then you've got to think about how do you get better quality users, and the way that's going to happen is through driving brand awareness and creating trust amongst your audience.
What about if an ad isn't working very well, it's not converting? Like, what would you look at to diagnose what's going wrong?
Okay, that's a really, really good question. So there's kind of two instances kind of where that happens. Obviously, you put your first ad out, or your first set of ads out, and actually, no, I'm going to change the response to that. So, no, it's a really good question. If an ad's not converting, first thing to do is not panic. Second of all is just remember in the back of your mind that any assets that you're putting onto kind of any form of paid media, or online paid media, should be disposable assets anyway. They're not going to be, live long enough, for you to be married to. So they should be in and out within a few weeks anyway. And if they're not, it probably means that you're probably running them for far too long. So if an ad's not performing, it's absolutely fine. Recommendation is at that point is maybe go back a step and look at an ad that has performed really, really well, and then look at the iteration process of how you kind of got from the ad that was performing to the ad where you are now. And did you approach that change scientifically and based upon data, or as a whim because you just fancied it? Now, if it was a whim, then go back a step.
Yep.
Make those iterations based upon data. If you've done it but based upon data, that's absolutely fine. Look at what you didn't move across, and then maybe the next test is to include some of the things that you didn't move across into a new ad, and then see if it works.
And I guess you've got to not change too many things at once, otherwise you're not going to know what it is that's not worked.
Yeah, absolutely. So typically where we start off, we kind of keep design directions to a minimum to begin with, and focus on copy and value prop and messaging, and then from there, once we kind of nail down the sort of messaging directions that work, we can then kind of focus on design styles, and then we can then move on to like ad format types. So do you want to look at pain versus gain, or product versus solution, or customer testimonial, social proof, or education, or whatever it is? There's a whole host of things that you can do. But you kind of want to be quite strategic, and not be haphazard with the way you're kind of rolling out the ads. And like you said, don't change too many variables in one go. And if things kind of go off the rails, you can go back a step. And remember, you can put some of the old ads live until you kind of figure out where you're going to go from here. So yeah, I think that would kind of be my approach if you've got something that's not working too well.
Cool, great. We're going to move on now to strategy, campaigns and adaptation. Can you think of any tactics that sound great in theory but don't tend to work too well in practice?
Wait lists.
Okay.
Any wait lists. When everyone says do a wait list, just don't bother doing it. It's a colossal waste of time.
Why is that?
I mean, you're paying for the same customer twice, because you've got to get them onto the wait list and then you've got to convert them. You can only realistically keep someone on a wait list for maybe maximum 6 weeks before they get bored, especially if it's a product like payments or something like that, because it's a product that's in immediate need. And you stick somebody on a wait list, they're then going to go find another solution for it. So that tactic of, hey, we're going to build a wait list and build up some demand for it, don't bother. Spend your money elsewhere. I'd rather spend the money on PR and get some headlines, spending on evergreen content, build a better landing page, or better still, just wait till you're ready to go live and then use the budget then. If you're trying to demonstrate demand, then all right, fine. You could do a survey instead. I think it's mostly because they probably just want to grab a headline, which is we had 3,000 people sign up on day one for this. Well, of course you did. You had a wait list and you've got, 12 million customers now in the UK or something like that?
Yeah. I would love to know about a campaign or growth moment that that really stands out for you, that you're really proud of, if you can think of one that you'd like to share.
A growth moment. So I said, one of my favourite growth moments was for a brand called Way Home. So Way Homes, they call it gradual home ownership. Mm-hmm. It's very, very similar to like the shared ownership or help to buy schemes.
Yeah.
And really it's basically like pension funds, etc., who instead of the government, who sort of buy a portion of the house alongside you versus traditional mortgage. And kind of the way they work, there's a lot of data behind it because they can't do it for every single property or every single house. They can only do it for certain types of houses. And so part of that is the location, the type of house, and I think it was like 40 different variables. So what it meant was that the houses that we could offer funding for, Way Home could offer funding for, were in very, very specific regions of the country. So we had to do, the campaign that we had sort of put together had to be really, really sort of geo-targeted. And my pay team, Ross, and his team, done this amazing job of kind of initially starting out with I think it was like half a dozen locations to begin with, really, really small sort of geographic areas, to a point that we were in 75% of all the postcodes in England, I think England and Wales. The interesting growth bit about that was each of the different counties had a different number of properties available and different amounts of volume of searches and people in demand looking for these properties. So we were actually running these campaigns almost at a county level to a postcode level, on almost like a daily basis for the client. And it was a pretty chunky budget as well. And I think the coolest moment, and you think about how long it is to buy a property. You go start searching for one, looking for one, and then you put an offer in, and then you buy it, and lending and contracts, etc. It's a very long process. So from starting this campaign to the time that we got the first person in was months. The first person to buy the property was months. So we actually didn't get the gratification of all the work that we were doing until months later. And out there's a family that's in this house that was bought via Way Home because they found it through one of our campaigns. And I think that's really, really cool. And I think now there's over 1,000 properties that were purchased via Way Home. So there's 1,000 families out there kind of through all the work that we did.
Oh, wow.
So that's really, really cool.
Yeah, and something, well, as you've said, it sounds like a very time-consuming, dynamic campaign that was moving all the time, but with more of a sales cycle, a bit more like B2B, where it's quite long. It
was very long-winded, and there was other kind of other nuances in there. We ran some meta campaigns that were really focused on self-employed individuals, done loads of creative testing there. One of the audiences, because the product turned out to be Sharia compliant, so we ran a campaign there targeting people who, of Muslim faith who, can only sort of buy properties via, Sharia approved as such. That was one of the best campaigns I think we've ever done, and one of the best audiences for Way Home as well. But I could definitely say that Ross, as I said, my head of performance, that client was his baby. And he put his heart and soul into it and he's done an amazing job there.
Oh, brilliant. I love that story. I would love to know, because obviously paid media, influencer marketing, it's the type of thing that you associate more with B2C. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a place for it in B2B?
Yes, so sort of kind of breaking them up into two parts. So for influencer, definitely delivered in a different way. I'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
And then paid media, again, yes, but again delivered in a different way. The nuances would be with influencer marketing for B2B. Now, when we talk about B2B, let's say anything sort of above SME. So kind of like enterprise level.
Yep.
If you're doing SME, then you can kind of use influencer in the traditional way that you're doing for B2C. For kind of enterprise level organisations, I think, you know, what you want to do there is your influencers become subject matter experts that are working within the industry. So the way I would do it is you know, I would, you know, set up a video series or a really high quality roundtable series or a podcast series where we get subject matter experts to come in and talk about their craft. Because if you're doing that, you then immediately create a line of communication with your target customer. So ideally get your CEO on it or someone in a senior decision-making position. And also you're aligning yourself with that brand, so you're elevating yourself there. And then also that all that content becomes proprietary to you as well. So you can do a lot with that content. You can chop it up into clips and put it on LinkedIn. You can turn it into a book. So that's kind of the way I would do that with B2B from an influencer perspective. I think there's kind of other things that you can do. You know, you can partner with, you know, well-known, you know, let's call them brand ambassadors or celebrities or whatever it is, and create something with them, and you can do something really, really focused. But it's not going to be in the same way, like, you know, we don't want someone on TikTok promoting, embedded finance or something like that. It's just not going to work. You know, we might do something really interesting with, like, hosting a dinner with some senior decision makers, and then we bring someone in from the F1 world and talk about, you know, how, like, the intricacies of F1, how similar it is to embedded finance. Just thought of that, by the way. So could do something like that. From a paid perspective, big difference here for me is where we're using paid in the B2C world as a performance tool and for an actual direct acquisition. In B2B, I want to see it as a content distribution tool. So the KPIs that I'm aligning to my paid activity when we're running sort of activity for B2B is not about really the number of signups or anything like that. All I really care about is how many eyeballs are we getting on the content that we're distributing. And really at the center point of that is having really good quality content. Yes, you're pushing out organically, all of your team are sharing across LinkedIn, and then putting some paid budget behind it, and then pushing that out onto very, very specific audiences on LinkedIn. And then that should then be partnered with some high intent keywords. And then once you have a big enough audience, maybe some remarketing or meta, for example, as well.
Even though we're basically in the middle of the year, everyone's always talking about what's happening next.
Yep.
Have you got any predictions on what the next big trend might be?
So I think, in terms of search tools, I think there was recently some data out as to kind of how much traffic ChatGPT is driving. And it's still pretty minuscule in comparison to, like, Google. So, Google's a behemoth. I think because we work in the marketing world, especially in a tech-focused space, it feels like we're living in this ChatGPT AI bubble and everybody's using it. But I think your average person really kind of
reality is that they're not really. But I guess it is going to happen, isn't it? And while if you're searching for a particular product, Google might still be your go-to. But if you're doing more research, perhaps, then will that start to change, I guess? Yeah,
I think it will do. Again, I think it's still really, really early days, and again, because we're in that sort of tech marketing bubble, we navigate towards it. But I think it's probably still a bit of a way for the average person, the average user. So I think there's still plenty of headroom to go.
Yeah.
But that I think is going to be the biggest trend we're going to talk about for quite some time, I think. Yeah, definitely.
We've talked about trends that are ongoing. What about stuff that you think has had its day and we need to move away from, do less of?
Growth hacking, I think that's died anyway. There are still some people out there trying to do a bit of growth hacking. Nothing beats good quality marketing. I've seen a lot of, like, going back to kind of the AI bit, people trying to use it to sort of produce, like, AI UGC and kind of stuff like that. And I think, trying to use AI for everything. That seems to be a bit of a fad at the moment. That I think can be just left into 2024.
Yeah, you've got to pick the tools that are actually going to make a difference to you and
exactly
focus
that.
on those.
But I was just trying to think. Yeah. No, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not a great answer, but yeah.
You've been running Growth Gorilla, as we know, for, you said, more than 7 years.
Yeah.
What's changed in that time?
From an industry perspective, I think, and a lot of this is just down to do with kind of like funding and macroeconomic landscape. You know, you go back a good few years ago, there were sort of fintech companies getting funding for kind of all sorts of things, which are just, you know, arguably some are a bit bonkers, really. What's really nice to see now is that the brands that, you know, I'm seeing at the moment and that are getting funding are genuinely really high quality, good organisations with good leadership, with really interesting, solid products. And you know, I think that's fantastic for the fintech space. The other big thing we're seeing as well, some would disagree, but I think the incumbents are starting to come up with products that are challenging, you know, the challenger fintechs. So you know, that's changed a lot as well. And then naturally, just I think things like, you know, the evolution of marketing channels, the channel mixes have changed quite a bit as well. We've gone from, you know, 7-8 years ago where some were still relatively sort of Google search heavy. You know, we've got basically, you know, no one even knew the term TikTok 7 years ago. We've got an entire platform that's fundamentally championed a whole new creative format, you know, vertical video, and it's changed the way that we consume media. You know, influencer marketing has really sort of picked up, so that's really interesting. That's become a whole new distribution channel as well. So yeah, I think,
I guess that wouldn't really have been too much of a thing at all when you started the agency, would it? I mean,
no, not at all, not at all. I mean, like prior to this, you know, I was in house, you know, working for a fintech, and we'd only really just tested Instagram as a channel. You know, I think the month or two before I left.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't really an acquisition channel we were looking at. So yeah, we were still running print advertising and TV and stuff. So yeah, it's changed drastically now. So yeah, hugely so, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I would definitely say that print has declined massively. Even events, you know, you don't really, who wants to walk away with a wad of paper? Nobody. It's just digital first, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Let's talk about the podcast.
Yeah, go on then.
How many episodes of the Fintech Marketing Leaders, which I absolutely love the title, the FML podcast.
Yeah.
How many episodes in are you now?
Last time I checked, I know he had at least 86 live. It's probably a little bit more than that now. It might be somewhere between either 88 or 90. There's a few on the cutting room floor that we haven't published, but I think we're edging closer to 100 now.
You've done absolutely loads of these episodes and spoken to some top industry voices over the time. Is there a particular theme or insight that stayed with you?
Yeah, I think it's a good handful of things really. It was, you know, it's no coincidence that the most successful brands had a really high propensity to test and experiment. That was consistent throughout. A really, really good episode listened to was the one with Philip from Zilch, the CEO of Zilch, and he talks about that. I mean, they're running hundreds of ads a day to test, you know, in terms of their testing. It's you know, it's an absolute behemoth. So yeah, that's definitely kind of one aspect. The other bit was tracking analytics and having a real handle on your tracking analytics and having a proper you know, MarTech, you know, stack set up and not skimping on that. And usually, if you kind of compare the cost of a good stack versus your budget, you know, it's only going to be a few percent, so it's kind of worth spending a little less to get a lot more. So that was, you know, a constant, consistent theme that kind of came up. And then I think kind of like with the brands that we kind of like, I suppose, idolise and love the most and whatnot, I think it was the thing that kind of came up there was that they were willing to be experimental, and not just in like testing what call to action, what kind of call to action you should have on an ad, but also being experimental in terms of yes channels, yes messaging, but then also being a little bit more out there with how to leverage each of those channels. So, really, really good episode that we did with Richard Cook from Monzo, and then Tom Davies from Yonder. I think they're both great episodes, and they kind of talk about how they do those things and their processes and they're thinking about it. And that stood out. And then I think for your B2B brands, I think the thing that stood out there, we've done a really, really good episode with Andrew from Paddle and then Mark from Rapid, and both of them kind of talked about, like, I suppose you can kind of call it like a flywheel, how they create this sort of like flywheel marketing infrastructure that hits at so many different points. That has content, paid, PR, kind of all of these bits and pieces, but really sort of talks about how they really get under the skin of their target audience, but then also the data behind it as well. And both of them, in my view, are like, marketing, B2B marketing 101s. So yeah,
we'll
they're
find
both
out the links to those episodes.
Yeah. And then
make sure we include them.
being bold with your brand as well was something else as well. So yeah, putting the effort into making your brand stand out.
Be bold and be brave.
Yeah.
So my final question, this is something that I'm now asking everybody. Okay. If you were starting a marketing function from scratch today, what would your founding principles be?
I suppose my founding principles, test fast, learn fast, fail fast. That'd be kind of one.
Yep.
Understanding and knowing our customer intimately would be the second. And the third thing would be, we will make our decisions based upon factual data. And then in the absence of data, we're doing it my way.
Okay. Yeah, brilliant. I guess part of knowing who your customer is also knowing what their problem is, what is it you're solving for them. That would definitely be in my top 3 as well.
Cool.
Fab, that's amazing. Thank you so much. That's been really insightful.
Great. Thank you very much for having me on.
Fab.
Great stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Funnel This. Follow the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoyed it, do share with someone else who might find it useful too. See you next time.